And so a lot of the problems that we face in our work and our lives, we fail because we set up the problem the wrong way. We use the wrong mental model to describe the problem. You always have to interrogate those assumptions you have. So much of the knowledge that is needed to perform well is locked inside the heads of a few experts. And if you don't have access to it, if you don't have the ability to learn from other people, that can really delay and stall your own progress. So if we're doing practice, if we're doing efforts where we're trying to learn from our mistakes and work on things, there's so many little levers, so many little knobs that we can make it a bit easier. And if we're feeling this is extremely frustrating, we're not making much progress, dialing those knobs back, kind of hitting that difficulty sweet spot is going to be more productive.
That's Scott H. Young. He's a renowned expert in the field of learning who helps people learn and think better. He incorporates the latest research about the most effective learning methods, revealing the science behind learning. He's also the best-selling author of Ultralearning, a podcast host, a computer programmer, and an avid reader. So today you'll learn 1, the promise and pitfalls of copying the pros, 2, the see-do feedback model of learning, and 3, how to build the perfect environment for learning. I'm Pete Mikaitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Scott. Scott, welcome back.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I am excited to hear wisdom from your book, Get Better at Anything. Tell us, any particularly surprising or fascinating discoveries you made as you were putting this together? You've been in the learning game for a while.
Yeah.
So tell us, what's new and fresh and interesting for you in terms of learning about learning?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I wrote a book and I talked to you about it probably about 5 years ago, Ultralearning. And after I wrote that book, I'm like, well, I'm not going to need to write another book about learning. And as I started digging deeper and deeper and more into the research, I was like, there's a whole new book here. There's a whole new set of ideas. And so basically this entire book was me including things where I was like, oh, that's neat. I didn't know that. Or, oh, that's surprising. Or that's useful. And no one had ever explained that to me before. So I think when you write these books, you're also writing for yourself in a way. You're writing kind of like, what did I wish I knew before I read hundreds of books and hundreds of papers and this kind of stuff? Like, what would have been nice for someone to be like, oh, here's a summary of what you need to know. And so, I mean, that was the starting point for writing this.
All right. Well, with that, let us know something particularly surprising, useful, and never before explained to you.
Well, so I think one idea, and this is one that I open the book with and I think is very important, is the idea that how we learn from other people is an extremely important component, not just in our own individual ability to improve, but the ability for entire groups of people, communities, even fields to improve. So the story that kind of captured my interest and got me started writing this book was actually about Tetris. Now, Tetris is a game that came out a little over 3 decades ago. And when it came out, it was a sensation. People are obsessed with it. They're playing it, hundreds of hours a week. They're hallucinating falling blocks. But if you look at the people's scores by the best people who are playing the game, the people who are playing back then are nowhere near as good as like 12 and 13-year-old kids are today. And the reason why is because back in the day, if you were learning how to play Tetris and you were trying to figure it out yourself, maybe your brother's older friend knew a technique and you could learn and copy from them. But otherwise, all the players were essentially disconnected. And now we live in the internet age and you can see live stream videos of exactly how people are doing it, detailed explanations of the strategies, how you move your fingers, everything like this. And the result has been sort of an explosion in performance. And I was really sort of drawn to this story, not only because Tetris is kind of a funny out of the box example, but also because of how clearly relevant that is for how we learn things in the workplace and how we learn things in our professional lives. That so much of the knowledge that is needed to perform well is locked inside the heads of a few experts. And if you don't have access to it, if you don't have the ability to learn from other people, that can really delay and stall your own progress.
Well, Scott, yes, I love that part of the book about Tetris because I have, in fact, watched the Tetris Classic World Championships a few times and am really fascinated by how, yes, the young folks today in Tetris are heads and shoulders above previous champions in terms of their skill. And your point about how with YouTube and streaming and such, we can really see what are the best folks in the world doing. And as a result, they are advancing much more quickly. And by contrast, I would say at the very highest level of, say, chess, that has not been as much of a phenomenon from what I can gather, with Magnus Carlsen arguably being better than Bobby Fischer and others of the world champions historically. But in a way, chess was well documented for centuries in terms of here are the best games of the best players, and they've been around for quite a long time. Whereas Tetris and other domains of knowledge, it's more of a recent phenomenon that, oh, hey, here we can all see what the best players are doing in great detail all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for chess, part of the thing is that it really lends itself to being documented through text. And I think that's why you have such a rich history of like the famous games that were played like 200 years ago and this kind of stuff. Like, I think the technology needed to document elite level chess play has existed for a really long time. So of course there is performance improvements. And I do think that the arrival of like really good computer chess has changed the game too, because there's just things. So that's like not a technological innovation that I'm talking about here, but I mean, it is an area that I think explains why some of the better players maybe are better than a generation or two ago, is that, you know, you can have Stockfish search through the space of possible moves and do research on like opening positions and stuff in a way that, you know, you had to use the human brain to do until very recently. So I do think that there are some innovations there, but obviously a major difference between Tetris and chess is like a discrete game where you move each piece and you can just write it down. And that's all you need to know about the game. Like you can do it by correspondence via letters. Whereas Tetris, because it is this human software interaction, you need to know tons of details that are not just about like, this is where this block went, but the exact timing of certain button presses and these kind of things. And that, I think the ability to witness that, the ability to document those aspects of play, I mean, they just weren't around in the early 90s. It was very hard. So you had people like Thor Ackerland who figured out like a really good way to press the buttons, but he was the only one who knew it. And so everyone else was doing something else, right?
Yeah, that's well said. And it's funny, I have heard murmurs that amongst, say, unrated players at chess tournaments, they say, oh, watch out. The unrated players showed up at chess tournaments are now phenomenal because they've been using Stockfish to analyze their games and say, oh, no, see that game you just played? These are actually the very best moves you could have played. And so they're learning faster. So by the time they actually show up on a measured event, it's like, watch out. Unrated players of today are just obliterating unrated players of yesteryear. So that's in a way intriguing, maybe not at the very highest championship levels, but in many ways, advances in technology are improving the ability of folks to learn because they could readily see what is optimal.
Yeah, and I think it's easier to sort of document these phenomena in areas like chess and Tetris where performance is quite objective, it's measurable, and we have like details on like what the best people are doing. But I think for that reason, it's very important to like think about these in the kind of softer, squishier context that we usually live in, like, you know, writing a book, for instance. I was just reflecting on the fact that when I got into writing my first book, that essentially if you don't have a bunch of friends who've already published books, like the world of traditional book publishing is just completely opaque. Like it's just something that like very few people understand. People don't understand how it works. And there's lots of people that'll waste like years of their life going down a path in writing a book or trying to pursue that as a career that's just a total dead end without realizing it. And so I think this is the sort of phenomenon of like, how can you get access to like, well, this is what the best practices are. This is how you perform this skill. This is sort of the template so that, you know, it doesn't necessarily make you the best Tetris chess player author in the world, but it gets you so much faster up to that frontier. And I think that is, you know, it's just a huge factor in whether or not you're able to get better, whether you have to reinvent the wheel or whether you're getting the blueprint given to you.
Oh, I love that notion there. Are we getting the blueprint from the best performers in the world? Or are we wasting years of our life pursuing dead ends to really polarize and extremify the ends of it? And I remember when I was in the early days of podcasting, I went to the Podcast Movement Conference, which is awesome. And folks are always like, how do I grow my podcast? How do I grow my podcast? And I too wondered that. And then it became very clear the answer, according to all the best podcasters in the world, to grow a podcast is to be a guest on other podcasts. That's the thing you do. It's like, it's not about Facebook ads or tweeting really clever things. It's be a guest on a lot of other large podcasts and be amazing. So people say, wow, I should check that person out. I remember it was kind of an eye-opener for me. It's like, all these top people just keep saying the same thing. Whereas I thought I would hear a variety of answers. And then I shared that with a couple other people. They said, yeah, that is the thing I keep hearing. And it makes sense in hindsight. And I've seen success with it myself. But if you're just sort of taking your best guess or Googling something, you are very likely to end up with dozens of paths when apparently one is the very best.
Yeah. It's funny. I just want to keep pulling on this game analogy that we've been using, which maybe I'm stretching it too far, but the basic idea in a lot of games that are played competitively is that there's this idea of a meta. And the meta is not really like the game itself, but sort of the higher level understanding of like what's the best practice. So in chess, that would be like, what are the openings that are popular? What are the responses that are popular? So if you're a good chess player, that kind of thing was something people did 40 years ago, but most people do this now. And pretty much any game you can think of has this kind of meta layer. But the truth is that the same is true in your career. The same is true in your professional life, that there is a kind of meta. There is a sort of like what you were saying is that the meta, at least at that point in time, of how do you grow a big podcast was, well, you got to be a guest on other people's podcasts. And I mean, I have been doing this I started out blogging. I have a newsletter. I've been doing this for like almost 2 decades. And the amount of changes to the meta as like, this is the way you build an audience. This is what you do to build a business, this kind of thing. Like they've turned over like 5 or 6 times, and you always spot people who are very good at picking up this meta. Now, maybe they're not like the smartest person in the world. Maybe they don't even have like, it's not like this person just has really high raw intellect, or this person is the best possible writer, the best possible content creator, but they have a really good understanding of the meta. They have a really good understanding of like, what is the best practice, what's working right now. And they're able to just leapfrog other people in their field because they have that understanding. And so that's something that I've really taken to heart in thinking of a lot of skills, because often we take this kind of academic model where we think about like, well, the main thing for succeeding in school or for learning is your raw brain power. But it may be the case that it's more your ability to connect with other people and to sort of figure out what this sort of best practices is for a field that maybe the smartest people in the room, if they don't have those connections, maybe they don't know.
Yeah, that's super. And so you've laid out 3 key factors, the see, do, feedback. Can you unpack a little bit of this broad model?
Yeah. So the C is kind of what we've already been talking about. How do you learn from other people? And the book kind of documents both sort of how enabling this is, like, a lot of the cognitive science showing why this matters so much, as well as some of the obstacles, what makes it difficult sometimes to learn from other people. Do is obviously practice matters to get good at anything. You don't just get good at something by watching someone. You don't get good at podcasting by like reading how to make a great podcast online or just listening to podcasts. You have to do it a lot. And same with all skills. But importantly, the kind of practice matters. And so there's a lot of research showing what practice does and what it doesn't do. And the thing is that a lot of times you can spend years, maybe even decades working on a skill, continuing to do the same things, and you don't get that much better at it. You don't actually improve that much. So I think a firmer understanding of what practice is actually doing, what it helps with and what it doesn't help with is very important if you want to make progress and not waste a lot of effort. And then finally, feedback is important because it's not enough. We don't just get things perfectly the first time. We need corrective information from the environment, from coaches, from our own performance, our own interactions with the environment that we care about. And so there's a lot of information about how you can fine-tune feedback to accelerate your growth.
Lovely. Well, so let's hit this mystery. What does practice do for us? What does it not do for us?
Yeah. So the basic idea, and I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack here, but when we practice something over and over again, one of the things that's going on is that we are making the skill more automatic. So to use an example, let's say we're typing on a computer. And if you start typing and you decide, you don't get a proper instruction, you're doing the hunting and pecking, you're using the 2 fingers, you're looking at the keyboard. If you keep doing that, it will become more automatic, more effortless, a little bit faster. So you will be on some kind of practice curve where you'll be getting slowly better over time. There's lots of studies showing exactly the shape of that curve. And you do continue to get better, but it gets slower and slower over time. So, in the beginning, you show this sort of steep part of the learning curve, and then it flattens out and flattens out and flattens out. So if you've been doing it for 10 years, you may not even notice getting much better at it, even if you keep doing it. But, and this is really important, the hunting and pecking strategy never just spontaneously evolves into touch typing without deliberate effort. So what the practice is doing is it's kind of ingraining a habit. It's ingraining a way of doing things deeper and deeper. Now, in reality, we often, when we're doing things, we don't do things perfectly consistently all the time. So there is a chance to improve, to try new methods and work things out. But it shows how, what we were talking about with the learning the best practices, that if you don't kind of get in the right ballpark, someone doesn't teach you, okay, this is the home row, put your fingers on here, this is how you move it to hit the keys, then all the practice in the world may not transform you into using the right proper technique. And so I think that a lot of what we're doing when we're practicing is this sort of dialogue between like, am I using the right method? Am I using the best practices? And am I getting enough repetitions? Am I getting enough like realistic feedback in order to actually ingrain this skill and make it automatic for me?
That's cool. And what's intriguing is that some activities, feedback is really built in. I think if we're playing a game, for example, it's like, oh, hey, I won. Oh, hey, I got more lines than I got before. That's great. Or I'm thinking about one of my favorite podcasts is Dark Net Diaries. And so we talk about hackers. And so it seems like they kind of get obsessed with the thing like, I wonder if there's an exploit here. Let me try it. No, it didn't work. Let me try again. Let me try it. And so you sort of, in some activities, there's automatic feedback built right in. And in others, I think about podcasts, they're not. It's like you could you could go hundreds of episodes and not hear much, or that would tell you to, do what you did last time. That's amazing. Or stop doing what you did. That wasn't working so well. So how do you think about means by which we get that feedback integrated well?
I think I would even add to that point, because even when you are getting feedback in that kind of environment, it's not always helpful. I had a conversation with someone about stand-up comedy and they were talking about, well, you're getting all this feedback from the audience. Like, why do some comics, they've been around for like 10 years and they're just not getting funnier? And it's because, well, whether someone doesn't laugh or laughs at your joke, that can kind of tell you, okay, say it this way and not this way. But again, it's not going to give you like the full space of possibility. If you're just not funny, if none of the things you're saying are funny, it's not going to give you like, well, this is the joke you should have said, right? You're just going to be like, well, I guess they don't like me. And so I think that's true of a lot of creative professions. Like you write the book and it doesn't sell. I mean, that is feedback. But like, what does it tell you? Like, it could tell you there's like a million things that could be wrong, right? You don't actually know. And so I think for these kind of complicated domains, this is one reason why we want to try to enhance the feedback that we get. So one of the chapters in the book, I talk about how in a more narrow context, this is the context of making judgments. This is not, a complicated skill like writing a book or producing a podcast, but something where you are just making a judgment like, do I hire this person or not hire them? Are they going to turn out or are they not going to turn out? Or if I'm a parole officer, will this person commit another crime or are they going to behave themselves when they're out on bail? And these kinds of things, these kinds of decisions. And they find that people who have extensive experience have lots and lots of confidence, which is consistent with their idea that like their decisions become more and more automatic. They don't hum and haw over them. They get more and more confident, but they don't actually get that accurate. And you can make like fairly simple models using spreadsheets that reliably outperform them. So in these cases, I think some of the ways that you can augment your feedback is, well, if it's a kind of creative profession, it's something where there is some sort of practice. It's good to have a coach. It's good to have someone who can like look at what you're doing and offer advice. I would much rather have a good editor read my book and offer feedback than like 100 random readers. I would much rather have, a good business coach tell me what I should be doing with my company rather than just 15 product complaints. I also think that having a brain trust or having a group of people where you can do work, share it with each other, and then offer feedback advice together can often be very helpful. Not because any one of those people knows more than you do, but because they're better able to integrate information. So if there was some glaring flaw with what you did and you missed it, it would be much less likely that a group of like 5 or 6 people would miss it. And so that's another way that you can enhance that kind of feedback for those sorts of pursuits.
Lovely. Well, I'd love to dig into a couple particular examples for putting these principles into action for learning different things. But first, could we have maybe your 4-minute-ish version of a rundown of your 12 maxims of mastery?
Yeah. So the 12 maxims is problem solving is search. I cover the basic theory of like how people solve problems. And this is this idea that we solve problems by searching for a solution in a space, like going from a start to the end point in a maze. And we do that using methods and knowledge that we've built up from experience. The second chapter is creativity begins with copying. This is the idea that creative progress is not opposed to copying. It's not like originality and copying are the antitheses of each other, but that creativity builds from acquiring past knowledge, from mastering methods from the past. Success is the best teacher is the idea that the way we build motivation and interest in a subject is by building up successes and having the right foundation of skills. So we know the building blocks of how it works. Experience makes knowledge invisible is the next one. And this one is about how as you gain more experience in a subject, your own explicit understanding of how it works often recedes into the background. And so this means that when we're learning from other people, often we have that kind of tension of like, how do we learn from this person when for them it's just obvious? And so we have to try to use techniques to surface what is obvious to them, but is not obvious to us. That's the C chapters. I have difficulty has a sweet spot. This is about fine-tuning the right level of difficulty and finding a practice loop where you go between seeing examples, doing your own practice, and getting feedback. The mind is not a muscle. This is based on a lot of research showing what exactly improves with practice, and sort of contrary to the assumption that a lot of people have that, if you just do practice, it's going to make your mental muscles broadly stronger. That's probably the wrong way to think about how the mind works. A better way to think of the mind is that it's like a collection of tools built out of knowledge. And so you need a lot of different gadgets, a lot of different tools to get the job done. The next one is variability over repetition. This is an idea about variable practice, about how practicing with variations in terms of what you're doing. So mixing up what you're practicing different concepts, putting things side by side tends to make our learning more robust and our skills more proficient. And then I have quality comes from quantity, which is covering Dean Simonton's work on creativity, showing that as creators reach the sort of frontier of their field, they tend to have about an equal ratio of hits to misses for their creative work, which shows that if you want to have more hits, then you need to make more work. And so this has, I think, profound implications for once we get to sort of the edge of doing our field where we're regularly producing work, finding ways that we can kind of consistently focus on creative output can make a bigger difference than trying other kinds of strategies. I talk about experience doesn't reliably lead to expertise, which is what we talked about before, about this idea that with judgments, lots of experts of different stripes show kind of poor predictive ability, and it's because they don't get reliable feedback. Improvement is not a straight line. It's about unlearning and about fixing bad habits and the sort of necessary work of correcting mistakes that inevitably arise in our early performance. And then I have practice must meet reality, which is about the idea of engaging in the situation that you're working in. So, not just practicing in the classroom, but getting out in the real world and doing it. And then finally, fear fades with exposure, where I cover a lot of the research on the neuroscience of anxiety and how exposure to situations that give us anxiety that we're afraid of, that have not strong danger, we're not very likely to get supremely hurt, actually cause the fear response to subside. And this is a very important factor if we want to tackle skills that maybe are a little daunting for us.
Lovely. Thank you for that rundown, Scott. So I'd love to get your view when it comes to finding these super experts. It seems that having lots of years of experience isn't necessarily the top credential or qualifier to say, oh, this is the expert, the master I should be seeing, learning from. How do you recommend we determine who are the true exemplars, the providers of best practices that we ought to emulate?
I tend to view it a little differently. So my thinking is not so much that we want to find that one perfect paragon of virtue that we want to follow, but that we want to look at the community that's at the frontier. So if I were looking at embarking on a new field, I want to switch into academia and start publishing. I'm not going to just find, well, who's the superstar academic and what they're doing. Rather, I'm going to find people who are sort of broadly successful in this field. And I'm going to want to meet and interview with a lot of them and see what they're doing. Because I think the communal understanding of how a field works, this kind of meta, is often surpassing any individual person. And so I think that's one of the real lessons of the examples like Tetris and these in other environments, that the group can be smarter than the individual. And so I use the example of Octavia Butler science fiction writing and how attending workshops was really, really pivotal for her becoming successful professionally. It wasn't so much that, there's just one person who knows what it is, but when you're in an environment where you're with a bunch of other people finally who are all doing the same kind of thing, you can learn from each other and you can stitch together an understanding of that field that maybe any individual person doesn't have all the pieces, all the answers.
That's good. And I think that's kind of exciting or fun for your own learning process as well. It's like if you interview 5 people, you're like, well, holy smokes, So they have their own eccentricities, idiosyncrasies, unique little things like rare talents that I could ever hope to emulate, maybe here or there. But these 5 people are all kind of saying 3 of the same things. Like, here's a theme, a pattern that's popping up again and again and again. Okay, duly noted.
Like, kind of a weird analogy, but the thing that I think about is that they did these studies with overlaying transparencies of people's faces. And if you overlay a bunch of people's faces, the like net result is a more attractive face than like any individual person's face, because it's just averaging out all the features. And I kind of think the same way about like understanding a field, is that like any individual person is going to like know some of the things that are important, but they're also going to have like weird pet theories and like idiosyncrasies that just don't matter at all. And so if you just interview that one person, you're going to be like, oh, well, the key to being a successful writer is to like work in a basement and like, not have any light because the light is bad. Or I'm trying to remember which author it was, but she like would lock herself in a hotel room naked or something like that. It's just like, okay. That's how I'm going to write.
That's the top takeaway from this interview, Scott.
Yeah. Now, those little details are going to average out over time as you talk to more people. And especially if you're in this sort of group environment. And what's going to emerge is like the things you talked about, where it's like, oh, yeah, the strategy for building your podcast is going on other people's podcasts. And it's like, oh, okay, that's the thing that I need to be focusing on. So I think we're talking about this in this kind of like professional context, this meta of the profession. But I mean, this is true even of particular skills, particular subjects. If you're learning a language, for instance, and you just talk to one speaker, maybe they have little like quirks in the way they talk that are not very generalized. But if you talk to like a dozen people, that kind of broader overlapping imitation, you're going to average out at like, this is how, people from this area talk.
All right. Well, so let's put it into practice. Let's say a couple learning scenarios. Let's say I want to learn how to generate more great leads for a service business. I've got a sales person who's rocking and rolling, who, when we talk to people, boy, the close rate is phenomenal. But we want more people to be booking those meetings with him. And I want to learn, how do I make leads rain forth? What is our get better approach?
Yeah, the first place for starting with that would be like find kind of people who have similar service businesses and what are they doing to get leads? Because again, we're like, there's going to be some kind of, among the business community, among the industry, there's going to be some kind of meta understanding of like, what are people doing to generate leads? What are the strategies that are working? What things don't work? And chances are there's some things that you're doing right and some things that you're missing out on, that other people are doing this and you're not doing it. And so getting to that frontier is the sort of first step. And so if you've already spent a lot of time in a field, you know lots of people, again, maybe that gap is like, there's only 10% of the things you're not doing. But if you're new to an industry, or if you are, shifting in the field, or the field's rapidly changing because of technology or new opportunities, maybe there's lots of things that you're missing out on. So that's the C part, and that's very important. The next part is doing the practice. So you have to make those calls, you have to make those efforts, you have to learn from those attempts that you're doing to generate leads. So I think often being able to document what you're doing and making sure that you're making enough efforts in that regard. And then getting feedback, obviously seeing what works, what doesn't work, and being able to like measure that precisely often makes a big difference, especially in business domains. That's one of the big things, is that people have like gut feelings about what works and what doesn't work. And then you show them the numbers and then you're like, oh, okay, I actually have a bit of a different picture now because I have data on it and not just feelings.
And that's great. And what I find interesting is, maybe in all fields, I think overconfidence is a general human bias, which is just fascinating me lately. But let's just say you may very well talk to some experts in marketing who will tell you with great confidence, conviction, certainty that, oh, this ad is garbage. This is the way to go. Forget that platform. This is the thing. And what really is the ultimate arbiter of truth in this domain is the results generated, as opposed to the guesses of the results that will be generated.
Well, I mean, I think when you are in a direct marketing kind of business, or any place where you're fairly close to the feedback, like your efforts, the things you're doing fairly directly lead to some kind of material consequence. I think that kind of keeping that tight practice loop with the feedback is so important. And I think pretty much anyone who's quite successful in that business is very data driven. They're very much driven based on like, run a lot of tests, see what works, run a lot of tests, see what works. I think where you get into trouble is when there's a much longer lead time between you're taking action X and you're getting some result. And maybe there's all these complex intervening factors. And so you can't do that. Like we were talking about publishing a book, for instance, you don't get to iterate as fast, maybe publishing a book. And so that's when you're sort of maybe relying a little bit more on what is best practice, what are some of these things, as opposed to just getting that direct feedback and learning directly from your mistakes.
All right. Well, let's say we got a professional and they are noticing this frustrating trend is where they'll say something in a meeting and there's not much of a response. And then someone else will say almost the same darn thing, Scott. And folks are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's move on this. It's like, what's going on here? And they would like to be the person who, when they say things, it is listened to. It has weight, gravitas. It is acted upon instead of brushed aside or ignored. How might we learn such a thing, Scott?
Well, I think it also depends on what the skill is that you're trying to learn, because why are you being dismissed? Why are you being overlooked in the meeting? I know that some of that can just break down to like raw communication skills. Like if you're whispering, maybe we should do this kind of thing. Or if you're saying it, confidently, those things can make a difference. But I would say from my personal experience being in meetings and doing some of these things, some of the things that are even more important is not only the stature of the person who's giving the thing. If someone is widely seen as being like the expert on X and they give advice, like if I go to a doctor and they tell me, oh, you need to be doing this, taking this medicine, versus my buddy Steve or something like that, who read some websites, I'm going to listen to the doctor and not Steve. And so sometimes the thing that you're trying to improve is not even a skill at all. It's just trying to like, how do I position myself so that I can be seen as credible when I'm offering advice here? What is my track record? What's this? Or what's the sort of evidence I'm bringing up? What's the kind of like things that I'm using to argue my favor? So if maybe I don't have that, I'm the wizard of X and I have all this great track record, so everyone listens to me on this. Do you have the data? Like if you're trying to make a proposal for it and you're like, you know what, we've shown that it's going to improve efficiency by this amount, and this is how we know this. It's like, oh, this person did their homework. That can make a big difference too. So I think anytime you're encountering difficulties, anytime you're encountering kind of roadblocks, it's very important that you have the right mental model for what the problem actually is. Because if you think the problem is you're not being confident enough, but everyone else thinks the problem is, well, you've only been at this firm for 1 year and I don't trust what you have to say, then it's a different kind of problem, right?
Absolutely. I think that's in many ways perhaps a step zero. It's like before we go off on a quest to learn a thing, let's make sure that the thing we're learning will lead us to the result that we're after.
Yeah. Like the way that I open the book is talking about problem solving. And like the big thing about solving a problem is that you have to be working in the right problem representation. There's the famous 9-dot puzzle, which is like a grid of 9 dots. And the question is like, can you draw 4 lines without lifting up your pencil to do it? Now, if you haven't done it before, you can Google it and see what it is and take a look at it. But the reason that people fail at the problem is not because the solution is like impossible or it's like really hard. It's because you in your head eliminate the possibility that would allow you to solve it. So it seems impossible until someone shows it to you, you're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, right? And so a lot of the problems that we face in our work and our lives, we fail because we set up the problem the wrong way. We use the wrong language. We use the wrong mental model to describe the problem, and then we get into an impasse. So like, as I was saying, you always have to sort of interrogate those assumptions you have. If the assumption you have is that, well, people aren't listening to me at the office because of X, it could be true. It could be the right answer. But if that assumption is wrong and then you spend a lot of time working on it, you might not see results. And so with any kind of business problem, any kind of professional problem you have, that's the first thing, is to just be like, what are the assumptions that I already have? What are the ways I have of representing the problem that maybe exclude the real solution?
Scott, what are your pro tips for when we're learning a thing and we're feeling frustrated, irritated, annoyed, that it doesn't seem to be going well? It's like, I keep producing junk, failing, messing up, and it's an unpleasant sensation. How do you think about that process?
Yeah. So I like to think about every emotion that we experience has been something that has been evolved in our brain to send us some kind of message. And so frustration, this experience that you have when you're learning things and it's not working, is really, we're kind of banging our head against the wall. We're trying something and it's not working. And when we're trying something, it's not working, we're kind of resorting to this process of like, assuming we're continuing to work on it. This kind of like trial and error, figuring things out. And depending on the problem, depending on how like many possible combinations of things we could do are, this can lead to just us getting stuck. And this feeling of frustration is like, okay, you could waste a lot of time here before you get it. Maybe you should give up. Maybe you should try something else. And so my feeling of whenever I encounter something which is really frustrating, the first thing I ask myself is, do I have the prerequisites? Like, do I have the background knowledge that I should have in order to get to this? So if I'm struggling with sort of a programming problem, I would look at like, well, do I actually have the fundamental skills to solve this problem? And can I sort of go back a step and learn those and then go back and tackle it? That kind of stepping back and figuring out what's missing, I think, is a very important prerequisite for a lot of skills. The second thing is, how do I fine tune the difficulty? So if we're doing practice, if we're doing efforts where we're trying to learn from our mistakes and work on things, there's so many little levers, so many little knobs that we can make it a bit easier. And if we're feeling this is extremely frustrating, we're not making much progress, dialing those knobs back, kind of hitting that difficulty sweet spot is going to be more productive. So again, if we're like really struggling with writing a novel, maybe we should write a short story. If we're struggling with writing a short story, maybe we should write like the outline, or maybe we should just write the introduction. And these kinds of little tweaks that you can make can all be ways to change the difficulty of your practice so you're not feeling like you're overwhelmed and frustrated.
Scott's about to share his favorite things, and one of my favorite things is our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. All right. Now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
So I like this quote, even though when I was doing the research for it, it's like possibly apocryphal. So if we can just take that in mind, and this is possibly an apocryphal quote, but it's from Ernest Hemingway, where he said, we are all apprentices at a craft which no one will ever master. And I liked that idea. I liked that idea of that we are sort of always working and striving towards getting better at something, but never quite reaching it, never quite feeling like we've just got it under our grasps.
And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
I think one of my favorite that we covered in the book was John Sweller working on some research showing that people could solve problems without learning how they solved the problem. And that one I talk about in the chapter on the copying leading to creativity and just how there is a benefit of seeing examples, seeing how other people do it. And in some circumstances, it's more beneficial than trying to solve the problem yourself.
Okay. And a favorite book?
The one that I think stood out to me most and I enjoyed most while I was doing the research for this book was Stanley Rockman's Fear and Courage, where he talks a lot about the research on fear and anxiety and things that I think are very important for our own psychological well-being, but are often not well understood.
Okay. And a favorite tool, something you use to be awesome at your job?
Honestly, I really like just using Word documents and writing things out. I think writing is an extremely powerful tool that is underused. We try to keep too much in our heads.
And a favorite habit?
I think writing daily is very important. I think if you're in any kind of creative pursuit, doing some amount daily is helpful for continuing to keep that axe sharp.
All right. And is there a particular nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks? They quote it back to you often?
I think that maybe the main thing that people take from my work is the idea that anyone can learn anything if they go about it the right way. And I think that's something that is a sort of a central idea in my work and something that people talk about.
All right. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
Yeah, so they can check out my website at scotthyoung.com and they can get the book, Get Better at Anything, wherever they want to get their books, Amazon, Audible, any of those places.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yeah, so I think I would ask people to figure out what's something that you're really interested in getting better at and try to find one thing that you could do to make it better, whether that's seeing from other people, seeing something that they're doing that you could try to incorporate into your practice, or some way you could tweak how you're performing it to get a little bit better.
Lovely. Well, Scott, this is fun. I wish you many fun learning adventures.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me back.
Boy, Scott's really crystallized a key principle about learning for me that I've been seeing again in learning a game. It was Dave Crenshaw, blame him, episode 241, How to Have More Fun While Achieving More, and episode 865, The Universal Principles of Successful People. He introduced me to this game called Slay the Spire. And it is fun, it is strategic. You basically need to build a deck of cards by making lots of strategic choices as you go up a spire of 50-ish floors, and you fight monsters, and you need to get stronger and faster than your opponents get stronger. So anyway, that's the game. And I remember when I first started it, I thought, this is just insane. I don't even think this is winnable. But then I learned, no, in fact, every randomized seed, they call it, is winnable. And it's winnable at cranked up 20 levels of difficulty higher than what you're doing right now. I was like, oh my gosh, is that even possible? Wow. And so then I learned from some folks. This guy named Jorbs was a streamer and YouTuber, which had a lot of content on this game, Slay the Spire. And sure enough, what I've been learning about learning as I'm learning so much learning the game is that sure enough, that's the trick. Is you find a few of the super experts. So we got Jorbs, we got Baylor, we got Life Coach, we got Merle, we got Frost Prime, out of these YouTubers, streamers. You find the best in the world. We see in great detail how they go about thinking and making all of these decisions. And then you notice, they all like this card in this circumstance. They think this is overrated. And really, for me, I pay attention to the things that I find striking, shocking, counterintuitive. It's like, what? No way is removing a card a big deal. Oh, but it seems like all four of these people think that it's a really big deal. Maybe they can explain why. And I'm finding this is handy. I'm starting to learn other stuff in the same way in terms of like marketing. Okay, who's really discovered some amazing stuff that's really truly working? So how can I identify, rank, score, know who's truly the best in the world? And that's tricky in and of itself. But once you get there, boy, if we can just really dive deep into their thought processes in tremendous detail associated with the decisions that you're making and how it's done, wow, it's transformational. So if you were on the edge of your seat regarding that game, yes, I have now defeated it multiple times with that 20 extra levels of difficulty cranked up by incorporating the best practices I've learned from the best in the world. And go figure, Scott highlights you can do that with learning just about anything. Find those people who are the truly best, learn from what they're all doing in common, and then occasionally reject some individual idiosyncrasies which are not that relevant. And boy, you've got the blueprint to doing it the best, then put in the work and make it happen for you. If you'd like to check out the show notes, the transcript, or links to items that we've referenced, please visit us at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP961. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.